When it comes to the live action adaptation of Lilo and Stitch, like many of them, the nostalgia is there, especially as the lines and scenes are redone. But whether or not it's still worth seeing, it really just depends on how attached you are to the original. So to summarize the movie, as with the original, Nani is a young woman who's trying to take care of her little sister who's around 6 years old named Lilo. Nani is struggling because her parents have died. She has to put her life on hold in order to make sure Lilo doesn't end up into the system. And Lilo, unfortunately, is somebody who not only is a little bit odd, but she also gets into stuff. And unfortunately, Nani doesn't necessarily have the capacity nor the skills to really fully take on going from big, lovable sister to now becoming a maternal role. And when it comes to the adaptation of Lilo and Stitch, yes, there is now the next door neighbor who's helping, named Tutu. There is a social worker who is Miss K, who's trying to help the best she can, but recognizes that Nani may be at the point where she needs to give up custody. And of course, amongst all this, there is the situation with Stitch, where Stitch is escaping from the Grand Council, and also Jamba comes to Earth. Pleakley with Jamba comes to Earth in order to try to get them back. And you see, for Lilo, Stitch might be this odd thing, but so is she, and they form a bond. But as time goes on, there's a question of whether or not Stitch is perhaps enabling the worst when it comes to Lilo. Could he perhaps be providing her the best? And whether or not when it comes to Jamba, Pleakley, or the Grand Councilwoman, will they still, as they did with the animated version, see the potential good in Stitch enough to let this situation be what it is and just keep an eye on it? So get to the V section. When it comes to Lilo and Stitch, there are certain things that unfortunately the live action adaptation takes away, which does kind of affect how much you may get into it, but it's still very much a movie that can get you emotional. For example, when it comes to Nani's situation with trying to keep custody of Lilo, the live action adaptation goes a bit further by having a social worker, by really showing us how empty the cupboards are, by taking note of the bills that are piling up. And then, of course, seeing Nani get fired in live action is much more different than getting fired in animation, since there's no kind of lightness to it. You see that person who was trying to work with Nani because they're probably aware of the situation, but because of how Lilo's acting, and then when you throw in Stitch and how he kind of makes things a bit worse, you get that as much as they want to give her a chance and try to work with her, maybe because they knew her parents or whatever, it's just not feasible for their business. And speaking of the parents, we actually get to see a picture of the parents. We don't get to see them live interacting with the kids, but they're pictures, so you know that they exist and are not just people who are talked about. And it makes it so, for Nani's situation, it feels much deeper than an animated version. For Lilo, kind of to a lesser extent, but you still get the fact that she's somebody who now only really has her older sister. She doesn't necessarily have friends because she's not as weird as she was in the animated version, so I wouldn't say it's because she's weird. Lilo doesn't really have that because she's much more like cute and a little bit quirky than like a full-on weirdo, but there's still this sense that she's aware of what's going on. She would love to have a friend to talk to, or even somebody to kind of hang out with on a consistent basis, but she doesn't have that, so she has to entertain herself. And she's not against this, but with that being her only option rather than one of her options, you can see to a certain degree that she is lonely. And with Stitch coming around, yes, Stitch is perhaps bad in some ways and definitely causes a bit of chaos in her life, but at the same time, because Nani has to take on the mature adult role, has to be the maternal figure, she can't be the fun one anymore. So this is the consistent way that Lilo can be social, is through Stitch, and have something that can not necessarily take away from any of her negative thoughts, but at least give her something to think about and do besides dwell on them. Mm-hmm. But with all that said, the Lilo in the animated version and the Lilo that's in this movie, they share a name, maybe certain things about them, but completely different people. And that's something that kind of got on our nerves a bit. Like, you can put in the little stuff like how Lilo's not an obsessed Elvis fan, which taking that away is not necessarily the worst thing. It's part of what made the character interesting in the original, but music rights and all that kind of complicate things. But losing that, not a big deal. Perhaps what the bigger issue is that certain things that made Lilo feel interesting is taken away. Like, she's not trying to take pictures of tourists and kind of make a joke out of it, or even social commentary regarding making them feel like the ones that are foreign and stuff like that. She doesn't have this sort of weird darkness to her that was there in the original, which kind of balanced out, the happiness and joy. Instead, what we get with this Lilo is someone who honestly feels more like she's made to be cute, quirky, and marketable, rather than somebody who has this bit of darkness to them, which could potentially make some people, especially parents, perhaps uncomfortable, depending on how they raise their kids. And then add on to that, when it comes to Lilo's and her parents, I feel like that is notably downgraded, so that Nani, to build up that character and build up her emotional depth, she takes on a lot of that. But in terms of Lilo, for example, one of the scenes that you may see on social media every now and then is when Lilo talks to Stitch when he's leaving and talk about, yes, Ohanami's family, gets left behind or forgotten. But when it comes to Lilo, she's the one who does get left behind, but she never forgets people who leave. That's not in this movie, and it makes it so, as much as you can still get into Lilo, I feel like a lot of what made Lilo unique, someone who has been a popular figure for over 20 years now, a lot of that got stripped away from her, even to the point of kind of giving some of what made Lilo someone you connect with was given to Nani. And as much as you see some of it needed to be done, especially for modern times, at the same time, as someone who was very much a fan of the original, watched the sequels, and even watched the TV show, this Lilo feels like it's made for a much simpler time with a lot of the complexities removed. But of course, with this being a live action adaptation, it's not just Lilo where all the changes come from. Beyond Lilo, there's the fact that Pleakley, unfortunately, doesn't operate in drag. And one of the arguments for Pleakley not being CGI for all the movie is so that, they can save money, but that still doesn't answer the question of why, when it comes to Billy Magnuson, I think is his name, why wasn't he in drag, or why didn't they, all things considered, hire a drag queen to kind of help build up the idea that him and Jumbo was supposed to disappear, or not disappear, was supposed to be, incognito. And to add on to that, we lose Captain Gon too, and now Jumba is a bit more of the evil one. But honestly, when it comes to Zach Galifianakis, the nicest way I could put it is that I'm not necessarily a fan, and he feels like an alternate when Jack Black isn't available. And for me, it makes it so, while his performance isn't terrible by any means, at the same time, it doesn't feel like he's the only one who could have played this role. It just feels like he's the one who got the job, either because he auditioned, because his salary demands or other demands were something within Disney's budget, not because he had to be this character in order for this film to work. But while those are some of the negative things, I have to admit, another negative would be Cobra Bubbles. Courtney B. Vance, again, is one of those actors who we enjoy. Him and, I believe, Lovecraft Country, good actor. But when it comes to Cobra Bubbles, similar to Lilo, it just feels like a lot of what made that character special and interesting got diminished, watered down, if not outright removed, to the point where it's like, it's just frustrating. I can't think of a better word, but trying to put a positive spin, because this is an on-the-fence topic, I do appreciate what they did when it comes to the social work and also on Tutu. For one of the push, if you watch the behind-the-scenes stuff, is when it came to making Miss Cocoa, I think that's how you say her name, who it was the voice of the original Lonnie, and then Aunt Tutu, who I don't know if she was associated with the original, is the idea of really presenting the idea that Ohana is not just Lilo and Nani's parents, but it's the community as a whole. Miss K, I feel like by having her into this, it really gave you a sense of how much that Nani was sacrificing. She sacrificed a full ride scholarship so that she could become a marine biologist so that she can take care of her little sister. Through Miss K checking on things, making it clear that there's nothing in the cupboards, how much bills there are, it really pushed the idea that Nani is doing her best, but she's struggling to the point where it would be better for her to give up Lilo rather than basically not only put her life on ice, but potentially go destitute trying to take care of this child. And then when it came down to Tutu, originally she seemed like a fun character. She seemed like someone who, with her appearing to be David's mom, maybe kind of build in the fact that David was an next door neighbor, and that's what led to him and Nani having this sort of flirtatious thing, which honestly, I just thought about it. David is not necessarily that damn. When it comes to this film, another negative you could think of is that David and Nani aren't as cute as they were in the animated picture. David clearly likes Nani, and Lilo conveys that when she reads Nani's diary that she does like David, especially his behind. But in terms of the interaction, I don't really recall them having any cute moments that give you butterflies and make you want to kind of like swig on your seat. It's just feels like something that was an obligation from them to translate from the animated version, which, like Agent Cobra Bubbles, just didn't really hit. But again, trying to put some positive into what the changes were. On Tutu, we do appreciate not only for the fact that it kind of helps establish why Nani and David know each other besides school, since now there's this push of the idea that they grew up next to each other, but also on Tutu being a woman of a certain age, liking to ride a ATV, it really be somebody who isn't just a nosy neighbor, but someone who will take control of the situation. I appreciated that, especially in the form of her. When things got really bad with Stitch and all them, she was one of the ones leading the pack. And honestly, perhaps more than Agent Bubbles was really like showing her oops. Overall, when it comes to Lilo and Stitch, it's one of the better live action adaptations, but it still very much fits into that realm of being a cash grab. For as much as you can appreciate some of the nostalgia, unfortunately, it feels in more ways than one stripped of a lot of what made the original a classic, from Lilo to Cobra Bubbles, even to what they did with Pleakley and Jumba. And while I am not saying that you shouldn't watch this, I do feel like expectations should be lowered. Not to the point of where Snow White is right now, but it's certainly not as good as it could have been if they decided to honor what made the original so special.